Okay. Apologize about that. So, all right. So we went over the definition of attraction just for this recording. We went over the definition of attraction, which we are going to define as the voluntary relationship and the enjoyment for each other. We reviewed kind of primary cognitive and behavioral kind of definitions of attraction. And we talked about what mainly this slide is concerning the diversity of attraction on an individual level based on shared norms, individual experiences, and our own biology and genetics. So I want to go over, I think there's about 3 kind of principles of attraction that we need to talk about. And this first one, I like the quote by Mark Twain where it says, familiarity breeds contempt in children. And what he is getting at is that while there are some people who are attracted to strangers, the majority of people are attracted to those who they are familiar with. And so this is the principle of familiarity. Now, there is a subset of our population, and again, this gets down to those 3 kind of idiosyncratic experiences individuals have. There are individuals who are attracted primarily to strangers. And these individuals kind of get attracted to them, and when they get familiar with them, they withdraw from the relationship because then they're familiar with them and therefore they don't no longer find them attractive. This is a subset of our population, but for the mass majority of us, we like people or we're attracted to people who we're familiar with. And kind of the way it works is whenever we meet a novel person, someone we've never met before, the first thing that happens is our alert system. Are we safe with this person? Do we feel like this is an appropriate to be with? And then over time, through what's called mere exposure, we gain a familiarity and then potentially attraction. Now, what the kind of law of mere exposure is it's this notion that we steadily will begin to like somebody just over the exposure of being around that individual. And so, you know, one kind of example is there was, you know, classroom research that was done about, you know, liking and not liking classmates. And what these researchers found is regardless of what level they liked or disliked a peer at the beginning of a class, when they measured it at the end of the class, the liking scale, went up regardless of the relationship between the individuals. And this is what we call the mere exposure effect. In fact, it was kind of the impetus of a lot of the programs dealing in the civil rights era where we wanted to reduce prejudice. So we thought just merely putting these groups together would decrease the tension and increase the liking. The unfortunate part about that is mere exposure takes longer than, you know, an hour a week of being exposed to somebody else for a series of a couple weeks. This is kind of a process. So through this, when we gain familiarity, the first principle of attraction is then that attraction starts to develop. Hence, again, it can breed contempt and it can breed children. The second principle of attraction is similarity. And again, I will say that there is a subset of any population that is attracted to the opposite of them, okay? But that is actually a social misnomer that we're attracted to people who are different from us. In fact, this argument comes out of, do birds of the same feather flock together, or do opposites attract? And to that question, the majority of the research suggests that for the majority of individuals, birds of the same feather tend to flock together, win over opposite attraction. In fact, in a lot of research that is done with people who are really adamant that they like a person opposite to them, we tend to find that those individuals actually share a lot more than what they thought. In fact, we find similarities in their value systems or their religious systems or their spiritual systems. And so even for people who say they enjoy the opposite, we actually, when we start measuring cognitive and attitudinal and social behaviors, we find that they're a lot more similar than they are opposite from each other. It's just sometimes there are things we don't like about ourselves that we are attracted in other individuals, but when we really look at those things we don't like, we hold those values, which is something a little bit more in depth to talk about. Thank you, Rose. And so similarity, again, is just the majority of individuals, again, the average, tend to be attracted to those who hold the same value, the same spirituality, and a lot of times the same ethnicity, the same language, and all those things. And a lot of developmental psychologists are now starting to understand that this might be something that is wired in us, because we're finding that even at birth, infants will differentiate between mother's color of skin, mother's language, and others that don't have the same skin color or speak a different language. And we find that infants will avoid those who are different from mother, and be approachable towards people who are similar to mother. And so, and we find this as early as about 2 to 3 months of development. So this kind of principle of attraction, we think, is a developmental type of thing that we learn from early infancy. The principle of reciprocity is the desire to want to be known, to be liked, to be thought of as well. Therefore, positive attention leads to greater attention. But this rule of reciprocity does have some caveats, in that, one, we have to remember the laws of operant conditioning, meaning that our own view of ourselves has to be equitable to what we're receiving. So, if somebody came up to me and said that I look like a supermodel, that necessarily wouldn't click with me, because that's not how I view myself. And so I would think of that as an unauthentic statement based on my learned knowledge of who I am. And so the law of reciprocity depends upon, one, how we view ourselves. What type of reinforcement history has our parents, has our peers, our siblings given us about what we look like and how we act? Therefore, any type of reciprocity has to be authentically given in a truthful manner. The other thing is that too much reciprocity can lead us to motive thinking. So if someone is constantly saying, you're the most attractive person in the world, and over and over and over, that tends to lead us to think, okay, this person, one, is not authentic, and two, what is their motive behind constantly giving me that type of feedback? So the principle of reciprocity, is that, yes, we want to be thought of as well, but it has to be congruent with our own self-concept. And it has to be given in the appropriate time and the appropriate place. So if you're talking to someone on the phone, telling them they look pretty, probably is not a form of reciprocity. However, if you say, you know, you sound really nice today, that makes more congruency between what you're stating and what you're experiencing. So those are kind of the laws behind reciprocity. Okay. So those are kind of the three principles that have been identified when doing research. Now, I am going to say that there is some cross-cultural research that has been currently conducted that is challenging some of these principles. And so we'll want to, as we move along in this course, look at some of that cross-cultural resources that kind of challenge these three principles. Because a lot of these are, again, based on kind of Western notions. So we'll look into these three principles a little bit later when we look at cross-cultural comparisons in attraction. Okay. So here is some cross-cultural, what are called universals of attractions. Now, again, I want everybody to keep in mind socialization and idiosyncratic preferences. So do these apply to everyone? No. Are they prominent across cultures and with at least 50% of individuals? Yes. Okay, so again, there's a lot of diversity and differences in individuals. So, but some of the cross-cultural findings about the universal attractiveness starts with physical appearance. So for example, signs of youthfulness such as clear skin, signs of health, absence of sores, white eyes, and those types of things. Large, wide set eyes, as you can see in the pictures below, their eyes are kind of more wide set. A smaller nose and chin area, and prominent cheekbones. So if we look at this picture here, you see the cheekbones are very prominent. You have the wide set eyes and a smaller nose as compared to what you would expect in individuals. So this is kind of some universals. Again, though, you know, we got to remember that it is averages. It's not everybody's preferences. One thing that has been found to be very consistent and kind of almost reaches beyond averages is symmetry. Now, humans have a desire for symmetrical objects. In fact, whenever we look at a picture, we expose people to pictures, we find that the pictures that are most like, for example, the Mona Lisa, they have a very symmetrical appearance about them. And so that is kind of the aesthetic argument that, let me go over this here. So this picture below, so we take individuals and we take a picture of them. So this is a picture, this is the actual picture of this young man. And then we computer modify it to make it so his face appears asymmetrical. And what we find is exposing these pictures to individuals, is that people will rate this picture much higher in attractiveness than this picture. So this is kind of where the kind of rule of symmetry comes from. So aesthetic argument is that humans have a preference for symmetrical things. There's a familiarity argument that when things are asymmetric, they're not familiar to us because we expect things to align. But probably the biggest argument comes from developmental issues, is that we find that the more asymmetrical a face becomes, individuals have lower fertility rates, have a slower growth rate, and a poorer survival rate. So this is kind of the genetic evolutionary argument behind why humans find symmetry so important when it comes to attraction. is that we know from a developmental perspective that the more asymmetric a face becomes, they have health problems, they have growth problems, they have developmental problems, and the chances of them being a viable biological partner to have offspring with becomes much, much lower. So the more asymmetrical the face becomes. So this is kind of the facial symmetry. And again, this is one that we do find across the cultures that have at least been measured. Attractiveness for men. So we're talking mainly heterosexual men who are attracted to women. Again, across cultures, we found youthfulness, good health, and fertility. Okay. Now, this does have a measurement to it, is we know that the waist to hip ratio, so you take the waist measurement to the hip ratio, and the closer it comes to this 0.7, the more attractive a man will find a woman. Now, again, there's some cultural differences in this that we're starting to find. This was done mainly between Asian cultures and comparing Asian cultures and Western cultures. But as we've expanded our research, there's more to be said about this. But there is a notion that the more fertile a female looks or appears, the more attractive men within either a cultural context or across cultures will find that female. And again, it probably has a biological evolutionary finding. I should note that this fertility issue and stuff has not been replicated in same-sex relationships, so men who are attracted to men or women who are attracted to women. And again, that probably has an evolutionary underpinning because you're not necessarily looking for someone to mate with in a male-male, female-female situation where you would have biological offspring. Okay, for women, we find some different things. So for men, it's you know, the physical attractiveness is important across cultures. For women, there's some other things that are important, such as face. Even so cues of dominance, this is an interesting one because the research that is done on this usually measures whether or not a female is looking for a man who is dominating or a man who is less dominant, more caring and giving and the like. And so we measure that. And then we expose pictures of different men that either have a dominance cue or a non-dominance cue. And even among women who state that they're looking for the soft, sensitive guy, tend to rate the pictures of men who have more of dominant features than non-dominant features as more attractive. We also have noticed that deep voices rather than high-pitched voices tend to be a preference. And I think this is again more interesting research. So in a lot of this research, and there's even been some popular TV shows in Europe done on this. Is you have two men, one with high-pitched voices and another with lower pitched voices or deeper voices. So you have this guy talking like this, or you have this guy talking like this, and they're behind a curtain and they read the same story. And then you have the person, again, these would be heterosexual women, usually done in this research, have them rate how attractive they think the individual is and what they think that their body type is before exposing them to the actual individual. And so typically the deep voice guy is described as a model type, skinny, muscular, those types of features, whereas the high-pitched guy tend to be thought of as probably a larger guy, more probably a lot of acne, all those kinds of things. Well, the thing is to have a deep voice. The larger a guy is, the deeper their voice is, because the body fat and the testosterone play a large role. And for guys to be very thin and skinny and stuff, they tend to have reduced amount of testosterone, which causes a higher pitched voice. And so they do undo the screen, and there is, you know, the larger guy with the deep voice, and then they undo the screen, and there's a high-pitched guy in more of the what you would call the stereotypical model type. So it's kind of an interesting thing. This would be great advice for guys to actually, you know, if they're interested in a girl, call them first in a nice deep voice before exposing themselves physically. Might help their odds out. We have found some stereotype faces for men, and so in a lot of research we find that a jutted jaw, angular face, and what's called craggy eyes tend to, these men with these types of features tend to be rated as more attractive than guys who don't have this jawline here, or these angular faces, or these the kind of steep over deep eye look, as we see here. But again, this stereotype face we are finding has a cultural underpinning, and we don't find this in a lot of cultures, which we'll get to. We find for women that fads are important, and I want to make this clear. This is more about local fads than it is the predominant cultural fads. So, you know, a guy, if you're in rural areas where it's a lot of blue collar labor and those types of things, showing up in a three-piece suit, you probably won't get as much attention than if you show up in more laid back clothing. So fads are important, we find, with women. But remember, with the fads, it's about local fashion. It's not about overarching fashion. We also find that visual cues influence other sensation cues for women. So the smell of men's t-shirts. So this is kind of an interesting research that's been done at some universities, where they will collect the exercise shirts of you know, an exercise team, such as a football team or something, after they've gone through a workout or something like this. And then they'll put kind of women inside of a booth, either with that stinky shirt or with a clean linen shirt. And then in both conditions, they're exposed to the same pictures of different men, and they're asked to rate their attractiveness. And we find that the women who are in the sweaty, stinky shirt booth will rate men's attractiveness as higher than the women in the freshly linen shirt booth. And again, the only difference between the two booths is whether it has a man's sweat on it or it's freshly linen. And further research has found on this that what happens with men as they sweat is they sweat testosterone. And so we have found that it's the presence and the amount of testosterone that really is what is mediating this relationship between smell and the rating of attractiveness for men. So smell tends to be one that we do. Again, we find this cross-culturally. Some other findings, again, this is changing with the globalization of our world and whatnot to some extent. Again, we go to mere exposure. Statistically, we do find that people marry someone of their own neighborhood, school, or workplace. We tend to marry people who are similar in height, religion, intelligence, personality, and physical distribution, physical attractiveness, excuse me. And interestingly, based on culture, and this is an important statement to make, based on culture, we tend to be more attracted to people we find that there's a fair and equitable distribution of resources. And the reason why I say this is culturally based is that in some cultures, there's expectations for the female and there's expectations for the male. And sometimes if you look at it from an outsider perspective, that looks like an unequal distribution of resources. But within that cultural context, as long as a female brings what she's culturally supposed to bring to the table, and the male brings what he's culturally supposed to bring to the table, that would be considered an equal distribution of resources. So I just want to, on this one, I want to keep in mind the cultural determinations of what males or females are supposed to bring to relationships. So more cross-cultural findings that we've found across the cultures that have been measured about both men and women value the highest. We find that statistically, more men and women value kindness as the first. And this is a rank order, just so everybody knows, loyalty as a second, and emotional stability as a third. So kindness, loyalty, and emotional stability tend to be very important for the majority of individuals. And then there are some cross-cultural differences between men and women that we should put in number 4 here. Men tend to be more attracted towards youthfulness and physical appearance, where women tend to be more attracted, again, across culturally, to status and resource acquisition, such as education level, earning potential, and ambition. Now, I am going to say on this level that it has been some cultural shifts over the last 10 years that we'll want to discuss when it comes to the status thing, specifically here in the United States, because we're seeing that more and more females are getting their education today. Their earning potential is coming up, and they tend to have a lot more ambition than men. A good example of this is developmentally, when do women and men tend to be able to survive on their own and become independent. In the United States, overall, the average age is 27. That's when the average person is capable of living on their own without the dependency on a parental unit of some type, or social support of some type, I should say, as well, such as a extended family or siblings. But however, there's a gender difference in this, is that women tend to today become more independent and capable of living on their own with their own resources on average by the age of 21, where we're finding men more and more, the average for a man to be able to live on their own and support themselves is around the age of 34. So you take 21, 34, that's where we get the average of 27, okay? And this is specifically here in the United States. And so we're seeing that this one, at least here in the United States, is having some big cultural shifts because women are becoming more and more independent. They have a bit more ambition and are starting to get more earning potential, and men are starting to kind of falter in these areas. We're finding men are less likely to go into education. They're less likely to seek housing besides outside their parents until about the age of 34. And we're seeing that among most men, their earning potential is starting to reduce. So here in the United States, when it comes to attraction, this is something that we will want to discuss because we're seeing some cultural shifts in this. Recent analysis of, well, it wasn't recent, this was about 5-6 years ago, of men and women's personal want ads, is that, you know, we saw traditionally, you know, starting in the 90s and the 2000s, women tended to post, I want someone who is emotionally stable, is caring, has a desire to be in a relationship, those kinds of things. And then around the 2000s and up to date, we've seen a shift to where the first thing women will put in a personal ad is, you must have a job and a car. Whereas men, we haven't seen that kind of shift in the needs that women, the shifting needs women have had out of men versus men out of women. And so we'll want to talk about that as we move along, and the like. And this comes to this point, issues with this is women's wealth and power have increased. The more that, and this is the other interesting part about this. And again, this is averages. So this doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. I think there might be a graph on this, no. Is that what we find, and I'll kind of show a graph here. And we're going to put power on this axis, and we're going to put attractiveness on the x-axis. So less attractive, more attractive. Okay. Now, what you would expect, what researchers expected is that as power increased, the need for a male power would decrease, which is represented by this dotted line. Okay. But what we found is, and I'll put this in a different color, is that as a female's power increase, her need for a male to have even more power increases exponentially. Okay, so powerful women tend to want even more powerful men, which kind of counter to that equitable thing that we talked about earlier. But this is one finding that has been interesting, and we're still trying to delve into this to see why this trend exists. Does anybody have any questions about mate selection at this point?
No.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Now, what about the need for relationships? We find on average, again, this is average, that men tend to be interested in several short-term intense relationships, where women on average tend to want fewer relationships over the lifespan. So we find this kind of differences, and we think this is kind of where the sex drive and the intimate relation drive tends to intermix with each other. If we think about a female who is going to mother a child, those resources and that need, the needs of that child is going to need a more long-term relationship with someone who can help with the raising and the needs of that child, whereas men tend to, as the geneticists have said and the evolutionary theorists have said, want to quote unquote spread their seed more, make sure that their genetic line is promised or is delivered. So they're more interested in more short-term intense relationships, where their genetic line is more likely to be passed on to another generation. So this kind of has an evolutionary underpinning from evolutionary theory. But again, we're starting to see this change. Again, as we're finding women have gained more independence culturally, especially here in the United States, they're becoming more educated and more independent. This need for fewer relationships has actually started to wane over the years that we've seen. So, and probably kind of an interesting relationship is between what women and men tend to look for is an experiment done in Hawaii. And in this, the researchers use confederates. What a confederate is someone who looks like that they're participating in the research, but they're actually working for the experimenter. And what they did is they went up to complete strangers. Now remember, these are people they've never met on a campus, and asked, would you have sex with me? The first thing that they said, how are you, of course, got their attention, and they said, would you have sex with me? And in this research, we found that 70% of men said yes, but 0% of women said yes. Those men who said no, however, actually made an excuse of why they wanted. The women, really, a lot of them became really offended by the proposition, and really said, hey, this isn't right. You shouldn't ask people this. You shouldn't do that. Whereas the majority of men who said no came up with an excuse of why they couldn't. So they said, oh, I'm married, or I'm already in a relationship, or oh, I don't have time, those types of things. Whereas women who responded with no usually did it with outrage and disgust. Now, some confederates went up to strangers and asked, would you go on a date with me? So this isn't sex, this is just a date. We see that it becomes more to an average. So about 50% of women said yes. And for men, it went from a 70% yes down to a 53% yes. And so we see men become less interested when they don't see the potential for a sexual encounter. We see that there's really becomes really no statistical difference between men and women, whereas we see women where the notion of sex is taken out, are more likely to say yes and start that relationship building process. So this experiment kind of goes back to kind of what we saw in this, where men are more interested in those short-term intense relationships, where women are looking more for that connection within a relationship. Now, there has been some researchers who say maybe we should do this research again to see if there's been any cultural changes because of the changes we've been seeing. And it would be interesting to see if this percentage goes up or this percentage goes up for men, just to see if there's been any cultural shifts. This research, I should note, was done, I believe, in around 2000. So it would be interesting to see if there's been any changes in to these results. Now, men will engage, according to this research, in long-term relationships. And this is where we see some differences, again, with men and women. Men will engage in relationships when they see the quality of the relationship outweighs the benefits of multiple encounters, okay? So when men tend to evaluate their relationship and the probability of continuing that relationship with a single individual, they usually compare it to the possibility of having multiple encounters with multiple women at the time. And again, this was done more with heterosexual relationships. We know that wealthy men are more likely, the more wealth the man has, the more willing they're engaged into what's called serial relationships. So this is kind of that stereotype where they have a wife at home, but they're also having a relationship with their secretary at work. And we find that the more wealth the man has, the more likely they're to engage in that type of relationship. Men are also more likely to engage in long-term relationships when they perceive the female's premarital chastity on the part of the female. And again, this goes to a huge stereotype, specifically here in the United States, where men are allowed culturally to have several sexual partners, and that's considered okay. In fact, it's considered manly, whereas females who tend to have multiple sexual partners are viewed as, well, I'll use the slut, or they're shamed for that kind of behavior. And this has shown up in this research that we found that men tend to engage in more long-term relationships if they view the female as more chastisized or less sexual partners. And again, I think this one is another one that would be interesting to evaluate again. Again, this research came from the 1990s and into the early 2000s. So it would be interesting to look at this again to see if there's been any cultural changes here in the United States. Women also may seek short-term several relationships. And we do find that because of culture, this can have negative consequences. At least that's what's shown in the research. And so we do know that women who tend to, because of those cultural underpinnings, tend to have greater anxiety. They tend to take risks more and feel relationship disappointment more than women who don't have those short-term relationships. This one, I think based on current research, we're seeing a change in trend. And so I am thinking that hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, this won't even be part of this slide because we are seeing some cross-cultural shifts in that. So there is cross-cultural research when researchers talk about cheating, they call it extra pair copulation. And we see a difference between men and women in people that they will cheat with. So women tend to cheat more often when they have a perceived dissatisfaction in their current relationship, and or they start receiving gifts from someone of a higher status in their workplace or socially. And women tend to cheat with men who are 2 social standards above their current mate, whereas men tend to cheat with women who are 2 social levels below their current mate's social level. And when we talk about social level, we're talking education level, physical attractiveness, income potential, all of those kind of social factors. Women tend to move up when they cheat, and men tend to move down when they cheat. Okay. So again, and I mentioned this time and time again that I think a lot of this research really needs to be updated because of our globalization, our internet. It is true that we've seen a change in who people are marrying due to internet and globalization. We find that many individuals right now, I think it's almost a quarter of individuals will marry someone they met off the internet, not necessarily their neighbor or someone from their work or from their church, for example. And the notion of instant communication opens up our world to many people, not just a few to focus on. And this has been an argument of why a lot of people are holding off getting in relationships. The average age for a couple to get married today is around 27, 28 years of age, instead of the traditional back in the day, quote unquote, of 18, 19, or 20. We're also finding that more and more people are choosing not to marry at all, but instead to cohabitate or and just be in an intimate relationship. And again, we feel that this probably has to do a lot with access to multiple individuals, that we really, the commitment is a lot lower today. And again, and I mentioned this throughout, the increased power of women, resource and relationships to partnerships is really kind of at a modern shift today. We're seeing, again, more women becoming more educated in more positions of wealth. And again, it's worth repeating, women tend to be able to be independent much sooner than men. We're talking more than a decade difference between men and women's ability to survive on their own without majority support from parents or family. Okay. I think, and again, what about same-sex relationships? Mostly what we've been talking about is heterosexual relationships. Again, I would encourage anybody who is looking at same-sex relationships to look at research post 2011, 2012. And the reason why I would state that is research done before about 2012 was funded by private organizations that tended to have an agenda, either for or against same-sex relationships. And that did tend to persuade the research in the direction it went. But in about 2011, 2012, the federal government started to release federal research funds that were not dependent on a motive. So it was research fund to do unbiased research on same-sex relationships. And so far, what we have found is that there really is no difference in the patterns of heterosexual attraction and relationship integration than we see with same-sex relationships. We're not seeing any differences in attraction, in mate selection, in relationship acquisition. That really what we know right now, based on that research that has been done, is that people in same-sex relationships become bonded to another person just the same as people who are in a hetero or different sex relationship. So that's kind of where this stands. So all these principles we've talked about so far hold for same-sex relationships. And in fact, as we will see later in the semester, in same-sex relationships, we see the same rate of things like domestic violence. We see the same rates of separation that we see with heterosexual relationships. So we'll talk more about that as we move along in the semester. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna ask, does anybody have any questions about what we went over today? I'm gonna stop the recording.